strength, power, divine calling. Samson had it all. But he lost it all. Have you ever imagined being the strongest man in the world, only to end up blind, chained, and humiliated by your enemies? Because that's exactly what happened. Samson didn't fall on the battlefield. He fell into the wrong arms. And do you know what's worse? He didn't even realize he was falling. Because destruction never begins with a great downfall. It starts with small, wrong choices. Samson was betrayed, deceived, ridiculed. But listen carefully, this isn't just his story. How many today are gambling with their own destiny? How many were once strong, once meant to be at the top, but instead opened the door to their own downfall? Now tell me, how far would you go to recover everything you've lost? Because Samson had one last chance. And in his final move, he did something no one expected. This story will change your perspective. 40 years. That's how long Israel spent kneeling before the Philistines, not out of reverence, but out of submission. 40 years of shame, humiliation, and fear. The chosen people, once strong and glorious, now crawling under the relentless rule of their enemies. But pay attention, every oppression has an expiration date, and God was already writing the chapter of deliverance. And this chapter would begin in a way no one expected. In the midst of barrenness, in the womb of a woman who had never given birth, God decided to plant the seed of hope. An angel descended to earth with an impossible announcement: you will have a son. Not just any son, but a chosen one. A Nazirite. A man set apart. A warrior with a destiny sealed for eternity. His name? Samson. His purpose? To destroy Philistine oppression. But, like every great calling, there was a price. Samson could not drink wine or eat unclean food. His mother also had to remain pure because this boy was no ordinary man. He carried a mission that few could bear. Want to know a secret? Every great destiny requires sacrifice. Every calling comes with a cost. The question is, how much are you willing to pay? Manoah, Samson's father, did not accept the message without question. He wanted to understand better. He wanted to hear with his own ears what God was expecting. So he prayed and asked for confirmation. And God answered. The angel returned. And here's a lesson few understand: before making important decisions, seek clarity. How many people throw themselves into the unknown without direction, without a clear word, without seeking the right guidance? The problem is never the absence of answers, but the lack of the right questions. And when that angel ascended to heaven amid the flames of the sacrifice, one thing became clear: Samson was no ordinary man. His birth was not just a biological event. It was a declaration of war. History was about to change. The cycle of oppression was numbered. The Philistines had no idea, but their downfall was already decreed. Now tell me, what happens when a man is born with a divine calling? Will his strength be enough to fulfill his destiny? Is a chosen one immune to weaknesses? Samson was born with a destiny already written. From his first breath, he was not like the others. While ordinary children played in the fields, he grew under the promise of a God who never fails. But here's a detail few notice: a promise is not a guarantee of success. How many have received a calling but got lost along the way? Samson's strength did not come from his muscles alone, but from his obedience. And that's where things start to get interesting. With each passing year, his presence became more imposing. The neighbors looked at him and knew there was something different about him. His strength was beyond natural, something never seen before. While an ordinary man struggled to lift a stone, Samson tossed it as if it were a grain of sand. But pay attention, not all visible strength reveals the true power of a man. The question is not, how strong are you, but, how do you use that strength? Over the years, Samson's legend grew. He was feared, respected, an unstoppable force. But strength without control is like a lion without a cage. Whoever holds power but doesn't know how to use it can end up crushed by their own gift. How many people have you seen destroyed by the very thing that should have been their greatest victory? Wasted talent. Thrown away. The world is full of Samsons who didn't know how to handle their own greatness. But Samson, oh, he still didn't understand that. He walked like a king without a crown. Like a hurricane ready to touch down. His destiny was great, but his personality, uncontrollable. And here's a hard truth, having a calling does not mean being ready to fulfill it. Samson held glory in his hands. But could he hold on to it for long? And then, came the moment that changed everything. A desire. A choice. A step off the path. Because no matter how strong Samson was, there was something that could bring him down. Something that has destroyed kings, leaders, entire empires. Something that has been the downfall of many men before and after him. Do you know what I'm talking about? Well then, now is when the story truly begins. Samson, the man chosen by God to crush the Philistines, fell in love with a Philistine. That doesn't make sense, does it? But pay attention, because this is how many downfalls begin, not with a war, but with a desire. Not with a sword, but with a wrong decision. He saw that woman and cared about nothing else. She pleases me. I want to marry her. But wait, what about his purpose? What about his calling? Have you ever thought about how many people throw everything away for a fleeting desire? Samson had it all. Strength. Destiny. Glory. But what about his heart? His heart could be his ruin. His parents tried to warn him. Why a woman from God's enemies, Samson? Don't you see the danger? But when a man doesn't want to listen, not even God forces him to hear. He ignored the warnings. He was stubborn. And here's a harsh reality, destruction often begins long before we notice it. On the way to see his bride, Samson was attacked by a lion. But he didn't run. He wasn't afraid. He tore the animal apart with his bare hands. Imagine the scene. A man alone, against a wild beast. And the lion fell before him. This proves one thing, Samson was strong. Incredibly strong. But do you know what he did next? He kept walking as if nothing had happened. He didn't even acknowledge the victory. Because true strength doesn't need an audience. Days later, passing by the same place, something bizarre happened. The lion's carcass now held a honeycomb. Bees had turned death into sweetness. And what did Samson do? He took the honey. He gave it to his parents. But he didn't tell them where it came from. And here's a deadly detail, Samson was a Nazirite. He was not allowed to touch anything unclean. But the fall never begins with an abyss. It starts with a step off the path. Upon arriving at the wedding, Samson issued a challenge to the Philistines. A riddle. Something only he knew the answer to, backhand index pointing right, out of the eater came something to eat, and out of the strong came something sweet. If they got it right, he would pay. If they failed, they would have to pay him. But what Samson didn't know was that the enemy didn't need to be strong. He only needed to be inside the house. Because the Philistines pressured his bride. They threatened her. And do you know what she did? She betrayed Samson. She extracted the answer from him and handed it over to his enemies. How many times has this already happened? The enemy doesn't need doors if the key has already been given away. Now tell me, what happens when a man who has never lost a battle finds out he was defeated by someone he loved? Because Samson's war against the Philistines was just beginning. He was furious. Samson, lost in his own rage, was out of control. He was the strongest, the most feared, the most invincible. But do you know what the biggest mistake of a powerful man is? Thinking that no one can bring him down. He proposed a game to the Philistines, an impossible riddle to solve. Something only he knew, backhand index pointing right, out of the eater came something to eat, and out of the strong came something sweet. A simple riddle for Samson, but a torment for the Philistines. 7 days. That was the deadline. If they got it wrong, they would have to pay. If they got it right, Samson would lose. But the Philistines didn't play fair. They never did. And when the enemy can't win by strength, he wins by manipulation. They went to Samson's wife. And they threatened her. Either you find out the answer, or we will burn you and your family. Now tell me, what does a weak person do when cornered? They betray. And that's exactly what happened. Samson was betrayed by the woman he loved. She cried. She begged. She said he didn't really love her if he didn't trust her. And how many have fallen for this same trick? How many men have been destroyed because they trusted the wrong person? Samson gave in. He revealed the secret. And in the very next moment, the Philistines came with the answer on the tip of their tongues. Samson lost. Not because he was weak, but because he was deceived. And here's a hard truth: betrayal never comes from a stranger. It always comes from someone you trust. Rage consumed him. He left. Left without warning. Left without looking back. He went to a Philistine city and killed 30 men. Took their clothes and paid his debt with blood. Because he might have lost the game, but no one mocked Samson without consequences. Now tell me, what happens when a man who has never lost anything experiences his first defeat? What happens when fury takes hold of someone with the strength to destroy an entire army? Samson had been betrayed. Not just deceived but ridiculed. He trusted, opened his heart, and in return, he became a joke to his enemies. But here's the problem: some men don't handle humiliation well. And Samson was one of them. He wasn't going to let this go. When he returned to claim his wife, he received the worst possible news. She had been given to another man. Yes. Her own father, without a second thought, gave his daughter to someone else. And he even tried to downplay it. But look, Samson, my younger daughter is even more beautiful. Take her instead. He thought Samson would accept this. He didn't know Samson. Rage burned inside him. And now he would burn something, too. He caught 300 foxes, tied torches to their tails, and released them into the Philistine fields. The fire spread. It destroyed plantations, vineyards, olive groves. It was a decisive blow. He didn't need to lift a sword, he destroyed his enemy's entire economy. The Philistines were in shock. How did they react? With revenge. They took Samson's wife and her father, and burned them alive. Exactly what they had threatened to do before. Now tell me, what happens when a man who was already angry is given an even greater reason to destroy his enemies? Samson exploded. He didn't just retaliate. He massacred. He took the Philistines and attacked them with uncontrollable fury. Killed so many that they had to retreat. But here's the scariest part: this was still not the peak of Samson's fury. The Philistines went to hunt Samson. They wanted revenge. But Samson wasn't an easy target. And when you think he had done everything he could, he does something even more absurd. Now tell me, what can a man do when he is cornered, alone, unarmed, and has 1,000 enemies coming against him? The Philistines thought they had won. They finally captured Samson. After all the damage he had caused, his own fellow Israelites handed him over, bound. Yes, his own people delivered him into the enemy's hands. Now think, how many times are we betrayed by those closest to us? But Samson was no ordinary man. He was there, tied up, surrounded by 1,000 Philistine soldiers. Armed to the teeth. Ready to end him. And then, it happened. the Spirit of God came upon Samson. The ropes that bound him broke as if they were mere threads. He was free. But he was alone. No sword. No shield. No allies. Just him, and a donkey's jawbone on the ground. And that was enough. He picked up that bone and made history. 1 man against 1,000. And he won. He struck them down one by one, as if he were harvesting wheat. Blood covered the ground, screams of pain echoed across the battlefield. The impossible happened. Samson defeated 1,000 men alone. And do you know what he did afterward? He mocked them. With a donkey's jawbone, I made them a heap. With a donkey's jawbone, I killed 1,000 men. That was his confidence. That was his strength. But pay attention, there is no glory without consequences. After the battle, thirst came like never before. Samson was dehydrated, on the brink of death. The man who killed 1,000 enemies could now die, from lack of water. And here is a powerful lesson: it's not the battle that kills you. It's what comes after. How many win great wars but fall in the details? How many survive the attack but don't withstand their own weakness? Samson cried out to God. You have given this great victory, and now shall I die of thirst? And God answered. He split a rock, and water gushed out. Samson drank and was revived. Because even the strongest must acknowledge their dependence. But listen closely. This still wasn't the end. Samson hadn't yet reached the peak of his strength. But as we've seen before, strength isn't everything. Because it's not only a sword that defeats a man. Sometimes, all it takes is a woman. And now you will witness the beginning of Samson's fall. Because no strength can match the power of seduction. Samson wasn't just strong. He was untamed. And when a man feels invincible, he starts to play with danger. That's how he ended up in Gaza, the city of his greatest enemies. Alone. And why? Because of a woman. Yes. Samson spent the night with the Philistine prostitute, and the Philistines found out. They surrounded the city. Locked the gates. Set up an ambush. This time, there was no escape. Or was there? Samson slept peacefully, unaware of what awaited him outside. But at midnight, he got up. And what he did next seems like a scene from a movie. He walked to the city gates, the massive iron gates that were locked. He grabbed them with his bare hands, and ripped them from the ground. Yes. Ripped them out. Not just the gates, but the locks, the beams, everything. He lifted them onto his shoulders, and carried them to the top of a hill. Now stop and picture this scene. The Philistines, thinking they had won, watching Samson carry the city gates on his back as if they were made of paper. This was not just an escape. It was humiliation. Samson was saying, without words, you think you can trap me? Try again. But here's a detail that few notice: Samson was playing with danger. He would provoke the Philistines, then escape unscathed. But for how long? Because, listen, even the strongest man has a weakness. And Samson's was already set. It wasn't a sword. It wasn't an army. It was something far more subtle. His greatest enemy was about to enter the scene. And her name was Delilah. Samson was unstoppable. Nothing could take him down. No enemy was strong enough. No wall was high enough. But if there's one thing that has already destroyed kings, empires, and undefeatable warriors, it's seduction. And that's how Delilah entered Samson's life. She didn't come with swords. She didn't need an army. She didn't set up ambushes. All she did was win him over. The Philistines knew that no force could defeat Samson, so they acquired something far more dangerous: love. And here's the deadly game: Delilah didn't love Samson. She was paid to betray him. She was the perfect trap. Samson, my love, tell me. What is the secret of your strength? Samson played along. Mistake. He said that if he were tied with new ropes, he would lose his strength. A lie. Delilah tested it. That very night, the Philistines entered the room. But Samson broke the ropes as if they were sewing threads. She cried. Put on a show. If you love me, trust me. And how many have fallen for the same trap? How many have handed over secrets, riches, and destinies to someone who was never truly on their side? Samson resisted once. Twice. 3 times. But Delilah didn't give up. She insisted. She wore him down. Until he finally gave in. Delilah, my strength is in my hair. It has never been cut. If shaved, I will become just an ordinary man. That was it. The betrayal was complete. Samson was delivered. That night, as he slept in Delilah's arms, she took a blade, and cut away every strand of his strength. Now tell me, what happens when the strongest man in the world wakes up, and realizes he is weak? Because what comes next, is the most humiliating moment of Samson's life. Samson opened his eyes. But something was wrong. He tried to stand, as he always did. But his body didn't respond. He tried to break the ropes, as he had done so many times. But this time, nothing happened. His strength was gone. And then, the Philistines came in. This time, there was no escape. They seized him. Beat him. Tied his hands. And as if that wasn't enough, they gouged out his eyes. Samson, the invincible warrior, was now blind. And here's the brutal irony, he, who was blind to the danger of Delilah, was now literally blind. The Philistines mocked him. They took him to Gaza, the same city he had humiliated by carrying its gates on his back. Now he entered again, but as a slave. They chained him. Threw him into a prison. Samson, who had once killed 1,000 men with a donkey's jawbone, now pushed a millstone like a work animal. The mighty fall. The unbeatable break. And Samson, who had once laughed at his enemies, was now the reason for their laughter. But listen, the story is not over. Because deep inside that prison, something started to happen. His hair began to grow. And with it, something else was returning. Because a man can lose everything. Strength. Freedom. Sight. But if he still has faith, then he is not defeated. Now tell me, what happens when a man who was once knocked down, rises one last time? The end of Samson would not be ordinary. The great Philistine festival had begun. The temple was crowded. Princes. Soldiers. Leaders. All there to celebrate. After all, their greatest enemy was now a blind slave. Samson was a relic of the past. A defeated man. Or at least, that's what they thought. But there, deep in the prison, as the echoes of mockery filled the air, something inside Samson still burned. He couldn't see. But he could feel. He had no strength. But he had one last request. And so, he prayed. Lord, give me strength, just one more time. The Philistines sent for him. They wanted to mock him. To display the fallen hero as a trophy of humiliation. They placed him in the center of the temple. He asked a servant to guide him to the main pillars. And there, with his hands on the columns, he whispered his final prayer. And God listened. The strength returned. Samson's body filled with power one last time. And with a battle cry, he pushed the pillars with everything he had. The temple collapsed. Thousands of Philistines died. Princes. Kings. Soldiers. The greatest blow ever struck against the enemies of Israel. And there, beneath the ruins, Samson met his end. But listen, it wasn't just any death. Because in his death, Samson defeated more enemies than in his entire life. Now tell me, was it a victory? Was it a defeat? Or was it both at the same time? Samson fell. But he fell taking his enemies with him. And now, the story was complete. Samson fell. And he fell hard. But the question remains, did he have to fall? How many today have everything in their hands, talent, opportunities, a calling, but are playing with danger, just like Samson did? They think they are invincible. Ignoring the warnings. Getting too close to the very thing that can destroy them. Samson only realized the truth when it was too late. But you don't have to wait until that point. If God has given you a purpose, will you live it out, or will you let it slip away like Samson did? Think carefully, what is your Delilah? What is leading you off course? Pride? Temporary pleasure? Bad influences? What seems harmless today but could lead to your ruin? Samson ended his life beneath the rubble. But your story is still being written. Will you stand firm, or will you wait for the fall? Now tell me in the comments, what was the greatest lesson you learned from Samson's story? I want to hear your opinion. And if you want more content like this, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Because the next story might be even more powerful.